people thought there couldn't possibly be an Armistead Maupin. A lot of people automatically assumed it was a pseudonym because of the nature of Tales of the City. And other people actually thought it was an anagram. They would send in rearrangements of my name to show what it actually meant. I remember in the very early days, someone wrote me a letter and said, "I know for a fact that you don't exist."
During the 70s, Armistead Maupin's daily newspaper column Tales of the City became an addiction for San Franciscans. It first appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle in 1975 and was an immediate success. Maupin later turned Tales of the City into a series of novels. They were bestsellers. They told the story of a disparate group of people, all of whom moved to San Francisco in search of a place they could call home. As well as telling the story of a colorful and zany cast of characters, Tales of the City also questions traditional American moral values. Armistead Maupin is not only one of America's most successful authors, but is an influential figure in gay politics. Like the characters in his books, he does not come from San Francisco, and his novels are as much a portrait of himself as the city he has made his home.
San Francisco, open your golden gate. You let no stranger wait outside your door. San Francisco, here is your wandering one, saying I'll wander no more, wander no more. The places only make me love you best. I love you best. You're the heart of San Francisco, welcome me home again. I'm coming home to go roaming no more.
Maupin created an imaginary world within the real city. The walkways and steps of Barbary Lane are the setting for his characters and their stories. Mary Ann Singleton, the naive new arrival in town. Michael Tolliver, the gay man who befriends her. Mona Ramsey, the world-weary cynic down the hall, and the incurably heterosexual Brian Hawkins. They all live in the same house in this city backwater under the guidance of their mysterious landlady, Anna Madrigal. This world has its own logic and its own set of rules.
Barbary Lane itself was inspired by a place called McCondry Lane, which is a little wooded byway over on Russian Hill with cottages and ballast stones forming the path, and there's a wonderful kind of rickety stairway that goes down to the street. And when I first discovered that, I was completely charmed by it, and then realized that there were lots of such places all over the city. And I felt that that would represent this strange mix of urban sophistication and village life that we find in San Francisco.
Michael, she realized, had become her best friend. He and his spacey but sweet roommate, Mona Ramsey, had been Mary Ann's mentors and sidekicks throughout her sometimes glorious, sometimes harrowing initiation into the netherworld of San Francisco. Even Brian Hawkins, an oversexed waiter whose advances had once annoyed Mary Ann, had lately begun to make clumsy yet endearing overtures of friendship. This was home now. This crumbling, ivy-entwined relic called 28 Barbary Lane, and the only parental figure in Mary Ann's day-to-day existence was Anna Madrigal, her landlady, whose fey charms and eccentric ways were legendary on Russian Hill.
What happened was I was writing, at the very beginning, I was writing what I saw as individual vignettes reflecting various phenomena, social phenomena in San Francisco. When I ran out of phenomena, I had to start asking myself who the people were and how they might react to each other. And they took on a life of their own. They started telling me what the story was about because they had personalities of their own. And at the time, I was not conscious of the fact that I had deliberately, or not deliberately, but I had subconsciously divided my own personality into varying facets and concentrated on those aspects of myself when I was writing about the characters. Michael, for instance, the gay character, is the romantic side of me, I think. Mary Ann, the ambitious career woman, is the ambitious side of me. Mona is the cynical side. Bryant is the side that's a bit lethargic, who's a strange combination of carnal desires and domesticity. And Mrs. Madrigal, the central figure, the mother figure, is really the only one that I think she came from me, but it was more of a question of the person I aspired to be.
For almost 3 years now, Michael Tulliver had been the manager of a nursery in the Richmond district called God's Green Earth. Green-collar gays, in Michael's lexicon, included everyone who dealt with beautiful living things in a manly, outdoorsy fashion. Nurserymen, gardeners, forest rangers, and some landscape architects. Florists, of course, didn't qualify.
Well, I'm in there several places, maybe not under my name, maybe just under conversations that we had had. Simple little things like what to wear to the Gay Freedom Day parade one day. Ended up in the column. I'd get home from work, open the paper, and there would be our conversation from about a week earlier, you know.
Prue had a Tony Hale townhouse on Nob Hill, plus enough Galanos gowns to last her through all of Nancy Reagan's administration, even if, knock on wood, it lasted 8 years.
Armistead gossiped about everyone in the city in his columns. Was there any gossip about him?
Oh, yes. There was lots of gossip about Armistead. But I'm not a gossiper, so I won't tell you what it was.
It was Father Patty Starr, San Francisco's idea of a priest, hell-bent for Studio B as Marianne beat a hasty retreat. Thanks, Father. Break a leg. It sounded weird saying that to a priest, but this one was in show business after all. Father Patty's late-night show, Honest to God, was taped every afternoon.
Armistead was at that time writing a column, Tales of the City, in one of the local papers, and he had a character in there who many people thought might be me. And were terribly offended. I mean, how could you put this person down and tease, and it's irreverent.
There were some very colorful figures here in the mid-'70s, well, there still are. But they were especially colorful to me then because I'd never seen people like this before. And so I appropriated aspects of their lives for Tales of the City.
There was a photograph on the dresser in a silver frame. A young man, a soldier, standing beside a 1940s car. He was quite handsome, if a little awkward in his uniform. Marianne turned to the photograph, embarrassed. He's very good-looking. Is that Mr. Madrigal? The landlady shook her head. There's never been a Mr. Madrigal.
I said, okay, this is me. This is me. I'm going to put myself in the book here. And I read the book from the point of view of Anna Madrigal. In each chapter, I'd wonder, what's she doing while this is going on? That first dinner party that Anna Madrigal has, and Marianne goes and sees the picture of the soldier in the frame. I knew she was transsexual. And I went, I'll bet. Oh, I'll just bet. Because she went through a whole name change, and she had an assumed name, and there was this unexplained man, and there was never a Mr. Madrigal, and I just leapt at that. And I thought to myself, because I'd known that the books had appeared in a series in the local newspaper, and I thought to myself, well, if a city can accept a transsexual character drawn with that much love, there's some hope.
When I first started writing, I realized I didn't want to write just about gay life. What I wanted out of literature, and what I had never found in literature, was a story that would incorporate everyone, that would place my life in the context of the rest of the world, so that gay people and straight people and in-between people would fit together all on one large canvas and function lovingly with each other. So that's what I set out to do in Tales of the City. I think my strongest instinct, really, when I'm writing is to entertain. That's not very respectable in some ways. There are people who say that that means you're not literary. I think it's possible to be both. I think it's possible for art to be entertainment, At least it's what I strive for, and if it's not art, I'll still settle for entertainment. The whole idea started in the early 70s when I worked for a Marin County newspaper that published on a weekly basis. And I wanted to write a story about the fact that a lot of heterosexual singles were showing up at the local Safeway to pick each other up on a Wednesday night, if you please. And I went down there on a Wednesday night to try to write the story and couldn't find anybody that would tell me the truth. I kept approaching people with about 2 items in their cart and plainly overdressed for an evening of shopping. And no one would come clean with me. So I went home frustrated and decided that the only way to write the piece was to write a fictional version of it. And I created a sort of prototypical young woman, Mary Ann Singleton, who was new in town. And the way I ended the story was to show her picking up a man who was not available, who was there with another man. And this struck a chord with a lot of people in town, not only gay people, but single women who were complaining that the town had too many gay men in it for them to be, to have an adequate supply of dates. And I just kind of took it off from there. I did 4 or 5 episodes for that little weekly newspaper, and it was so successful that several years later I took it to the Chronicle with the proposal that I do it on a daily basis.
Well, this is where all the beautiful people come to shop, and if you're shopping for more than food, if you're shopping for romance, this is one of the best places in the city to meet someone.
What kind of beautiful people are you talking about?
People who have money, people who have looks, people who are looking for romance in their lives.
Is it a single scene? Is it male and female, male and male, or?
Male and female mostly, but in some of the aisles you can find something different.
Do you think there are there different sections as well?
I think so. Frozen foods is an interesting section. It depends on what people are looking for, what the approaches are.
What do you mean by frozen foods is an interesting section?
Some people are a little quieter. It's a little less, a little different approach. People who come here for espressos and cappuccinos are a little more vibrant, and they're looking for something a little more electric.
Do you get people dating at the espresso machine?
That has happened. It's a wonderful place to meet people. It's about commiseration. It's a very San Francisco thing. Romances have blossomed here.
A dozen cardboard discs dangled from the ceiling of the Marina Safeway, coaxing the customers with a double-edged message. Since we're neighbors, let's be friends. And friends were being made. As Mary Ann watched, a blond man in a Stanford sweatshirt sauntered up to a brunette in a denim halter. Excuse me, but could you tell me whether it's better to use Safola oil or Wesson oil? The girl giggled. For what? I don't believe this, said Mary Ann, taking a shopping cart. Every Wednesday night. Connie nodded. It ain't half bad on weekends either. She grabbed a cart and charged off down a busy aisle. See ya. It works better if you're alone.
Maupin's observation of the Safeway social scene launched his career as a writer of serial fiction. But his own background was far removed from the vagaries of life in San Francisco.
I grew up in a very conservative Southern household with a strong military tradition and a family that still felt the Civil War was going on in a lot of ways. We flew a Confederate flag in my father's study. I grew up seeing only that view of the world. I remember when I was a little boy, going to church with my parents, and the minister got up and gave a sermon in which he suggested that segregation was wrong. And my father marched the entire family out of the church in indignation, in protest against the sermon, in the midst of the sermon. So that's how far I had to come. I was taught so much about my heritage when I was growing up that I had the vague feeling that I was royalty of some sort. It was a terrible shock to realize that our little ranch house in suburbia really wasn't the southern mansion that I imagined it to be. Of course, my full name is Armistead Jones Maupin, Jr., Armistead Maupin Sr. still lives in Raleigh, my hometown, and is a lawyer there. These are portraits of my mother and my father. My mother looked very much like this when she died in 1979, and she was a great lady. She was crazy about animals, and she had a histrionic streak that I enjoyed a lot. The biggest inspiration in my life, really, was my grandmother on my mother's side, who was a wonderful person, a very fey old lady who read palms and drank gins and tonics and wore big picture hats. As a young woman, she'd been a suffragist in England. She was English, and she went all over Great Britain arguing for women's rights. What I like about this picture is the fact that there's only one man in it. There are actually some people off in the shadows who've been airbrushed out of the picture. These early feminists decided that men were unnecessary in the photograph, which I think is kind of neat. This is a picture of an ancestor of mine, which I like because it seems, it seems sort of gay, actually. The guy on the right is General George Washington Maupin. That was really his name, I'm told. And the man on the left is a lifelong friend whose name I don't know. The dog in the middle was called Tennessee Lead and was apparently more famous than either of the men. But Terry and I keep it around because it reminds us of us. I know I can't tell you what it is to be gay, but I can tell you what it's not. It's not hiding behind words, Mama, like family and decency and Christianity. It's not fearing your body or the pleasures that God made for it. It's not judging your neighbor, except when he's crass or unkind. Being gay has taught me tolerance, compassion, and humility. It has shown me the limitless possibilities of living. It has given me people whose passion and kindness and sensitivity have provided a constant source of strength. It has brought me into the family of man, Mama, and I like it here. I wrote this letter from the gay character to his parents, and it was really my own letter to my own parents. It was the fastest thing I ever wrote. I did it in 45 minutes because it was a speech I'd been trying to make for almost 15 years. My father wrote a letter after he had read Tales of the City as a completed book. 2 lines. Your mother and I read Tales of the City today, moving to Zanzibar tomorrow. Love, Daddy. Which was his way of saying he didn't understand it, but he loved me anyway. My father was in the Navy, and so I joined the Navy, I think, pretty much in an effort to please him. It also seemed the most romantic branch of the service to me. I had 2 tours of duty, the first in the Mediterranean, the second in Vietnam. For the first 3 months in Saigon, I was assistant protocol officer to the admiral there, which consisted largely of taking his wife on shopping trips through Saigon with a 45 strapped on my side. I had somewhat of a what my mother referred to as a Lawrence of Arabia complex, because I wanted to go out into the field. I wanted deprivation, and so I volunteered for to work in a small village up on the Cambodian border, and did that for about 10 months. I was essentially a communications officer. I manned a little bunker and talked on the radio. I wasn't in combat very much. There are no heroics to tell you, I'm glad to say.
But just being in Vietnam, was that a frightening experience?
It was sometimes, 10 minutes of total terror followed by 3 months of total tedium. I actually went back to Vietnam after I was there as a military person to build houses for disabled Vietnamese veterans. It first started, I guess, during the May Day demonstrations. I had a friend call me long distance from Washington. He was an old college buddy, and he asked me if I would come to Washington and do press releases for John Kerry, who at that time was
organizing the Vietnam veterans against the war. I didn't feel the way Mr. Carey did, and I felt that he was using his experience in Vietnam as a way of furthering his own political ideals. As a result, I got pretty angry and wanted to do something, but I didn't feel like we could throw any more rhetoric into the pot at this point. So I wrote a letter to Admiral Zumwalt, Chief of Naval Operations, and to General Hughes, the President's military aide, and asked if the government would help out with a project in which Vietnamese veterans could return to Vietnam to help the Vietnamese people.
Because of that, I was invited to the White House in 1970 to meet President Nixon. And I have a picture that I used to hang on my wall in the kitchen years ago until my San Franciscan friends just said it was too much of me shaking hands with Richard Nixon. But I keep it there to remind myself how many people I've been in my lifetime and how far I've come.
At the time he met Richard Nixon, Maupin was still a staunch upholder of the all-American way of life. However, he had his first inkling of another way of life when he left the Navy in 1970 and saw San Francisco for the first time.
When I came back from Vietnam, I processed out at Treasure Island, and it was a time of real flux for me. I really didn't know what I was going to do with my life. As a gay man, I felt oddly comfortable in the Navy. It was an all-male environment. I wasn't, sexually active with anyone I knew in the Navy, but I was comfortable there, and it was a world I had come to know after 3 years of learning its rules. But I stood there and looked at the city when I had free moments and looked across that water at that extraordinary white vision rising above the blue water and used to fantasize about living there. I didn't have the imagination at the time to see how I could do it. It wasn't until several years later that I realized that the dream could come true.
Mary Ann Singleton was 25 years old when she saw San Francisco for the first time. She came to the city alone for an 8-day vacation. On the 5th night, she drank 3 Irish coffees at the Buena Vista, realized that her mood ring was blue, and decided to phone her mother in Cleveland. "Hi, Mom, it's me." "Oh, darling, your Daddy and I were just talking about you. There was this crazy man on McMillan and Wife who was strangling all these secretaries, and I just couldn't help to thinking, Mom..." "I know, just crazy old Mom worrying herself sick over nothing, but you never can tell about those things. I mean, look at that poor Patty Hearst locked up in that closet with all those awful... Mom, long distance. Oh, yes, you must be having a grand time. Mom, I want you to do me a favor." "Of course, darling. Oh, before I forget it, I ran into Mr. Lassiter yesterday at Ridgemont Mall, and he said the office is just falling apart with you gone. They don't get many good secretaries at Lassiter Fertilizers." "Mom, that's sort of why I called." "Yes, darling." "I want you to call Mr. Lassiter and tell him I won't be in on Monday morning." "Oh, Mary Ann, I'm not sure you should ask for an extension on your vacation." "It's not an extension, Mom." "Well, then why?" "I'm not coming home, Mom."
I came here from Texas right out of high school, senior year, mainly because of the culture here, because the Dead lived here, the Grateful Dead, the Jefferson Airplane, and I was real into music, the Summer of Love. And I thought, God, if all these people are out there, that's where I belong. So I packed up the car and came out.
I was born in South Bend, Indiana. We moved to California right after the Second World War in 1945. And I entered the seminary here in 1952 and served in a number of parishes here in the Archdiocese after completing my studies. And then in the late 60s got involved in media.
I'm from Texas originally, Texas and Oklahoma, in the United States, of course. And I came to San Francisco because I think it's the most beautiful place in the world, and I was attracted to it. And so I came here about 30 years ago.
I am originally from New York, but I've been in San Francisco for 31 years. And if you've talked to very many people in San Francisco, that really makes me a native, because most or a lot of people have moved here over a certain period of time and haven't lived here that long.
Why did you come here originally?
You know why I came here originally? I watched a television series on TV, a TV series that was about San Francisco, and it looked so great I decided that's where I wanted to live.
I moved here from Philadelphia about 3 or 4 years ago mainly because Philadelphia was not very accepting of who and what I was as a transsexual. I was very out, and I was very out and about in the community. And I'd come to San Francisco on a visit, and just, it felt like magic.
San Francisco has long had a reputation as a haven for tolerant attitudes and for people who are different and need somewhere to run. Its inhabitants call it simply the city. It is said that to commit suicide in San Francisco means you have truly reached the end of the road, and that those who jump from the Golden Gate Bridge in desperation always face towards the city to symbolize their failed aspirations.
Tales was the first fiction to appear in an American newspaper in something like 30 years. It had been done, I think, in the 30s and 40s, mostly in terms of romances and westerns. It was an extremely unrespectable form. The Chronicle was really the ideal place for Tales of the City. It started out back in the Barbary Coast days as the Dramatic Chronicle. It was a little poop sheet, really, for the strip shows and burlesque houses along the Barbary Coast. One of the running jokes of the building is the fact that there's this big, serious plaque in the lobby talking about how the Chronicle believes in the highest principles of journalism. If you look very closely at the plaque, you'll see that journalism is spelled wrong. And in true Chronicle fashion, they didn't replace the plaque or change the word. They just put a little caret there up at the top and added the letter. So it's journalism that we practice at the Chronicle, not journalism. In the early days at the Chronicle, I worked in the people section. It was a very interesting demarcation. There was a line of filing cabinets, and the women all sat on one side and did the light, fluffy feature news and the society news. And the men were all on the other side doing the hard news. And Armistead Maupin was in the middle of the fluff section with the women. And it was great. It was the best place to be. There was far too much testosterone on the other side of the filing cabinets as far as I was concerned. And there were some very nice women there. We had a good time.
When Armistead started writing Tales of the City in 1976, he was told that he had to actually come down to the newspaper to do the column. The section that the column appeared was only a couple of years of past being called Women's World. At that point, we were already the people section, but in our minds, we were still Women's World, and certainly everyone in the department was still a woman. So Armistead came in, and there were about 10 writers. I was one of them who were working in the department at the time. We were all very good girls. We were all still on our first marriages at that point. And there was sort of a running joke, the older woman who was the editor of the department, whose name was Ruth Miller, and we used to all think of ourselves as graduates of Miss Miller's finishing school. Into this kind of an environment, Armistead suddenly appeared, and I can't begin to describe what it was like for us to have him in the department. He would sort of come in about 2 hours after he was supposed to, because it was very difficult for him to get there first thing in the morning, and plop down on his desk and go, "God, did I have a night last night?" And we would all suddenly gather around him and be regaled by stories of all the rich and famous people whom he'd been partying with all night. It appeared as if he never got any sleep. And then what used to really kill us is that he would sort of turn to at his desk and effortlessly, in about half an hour, type out these incredibly funny columns, which of course became the book Tales of the City.
Across town on Valencia Street, Michael and Ned were sharing a Calistoga at Devil's Herd, the city's most popular gay country western bar. What Michael liked most about the saloon was its authenticity, the twangy, down-home band, Western Electric, the horse collars dangling from the ceiling, the folksy Annie Oakley-type dyke shouting Yahoo from the bar. If he squinted his eyes just so, the dudes doing the cowboy dancing could be grizzled buckaroos, horny claim jumpers who were simply making do until the next shipment of saloon girls came in from the east. True, the beefcake cowboy murals struck a somewhat citified note in the overall scheme of things, but Michael didn't mind. Someday he believed the homoerotic cave drawings in San Francisco's gay bars would be afforded the same sort of reference that's currently heaped upon WPA murals and deco apartment house lobbies. The band was playing Stand By Your Man. As soon as they recognized the tune, Michael and Ned smiled in unison. John was big on that one, said Michael. Just as a song, though, not as a way of life.
Well, I was very much the gay blade in those days in terms of having a real nightlife. I don't think I watched any television in those days because I was always out looking for Mr. Right, and a lot of the women were, too. So I would come in the mornings and tell them what happened the night before.
Every day he would come in and there would be a new story about somebody that he had found out was gay. And we didn't really know what to make of this. I mean, the stories all sounded true, but, you know, then there was Armistead, who was this amazingly flamboyant person, and we all kind of believed him. But I will never forget the day that he came in, and we all gathered around him, and he said, guess what he had found out? And we were all wide-eyed. He said, both Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were gay. Well, that's the point where I stopped believing him.
When the gay characters started appearing, about 6 weeks into the series, the managing editor got noticeably nervous and called me into his office and told me from that point on that there would be a chart kept in his office that we would enter the new characters on as they appeared in the column. The theory was that if at any point the characters, the gay characters, numbered more than 1/3 of the overall population of the series, that I would have to cut back.
My name is Robert, he said, extending his hand. Of course, she thought. Not Bob or Robbie, but Robert. Strong and direct. She gripped his hand. I'm Mary Ann Singleton. She wanted him to remember her last name. Well, Mary Ann Singleton, maybe you can help me with my latest culinary crisis. It involved asparagus. Mary Ann had never found the subject so exciting. She was watching Robert's eyes respond to her hollandaise recipe when a young man with a mustache approached. Well, I can't leave you alone for a minute, he said. He was talking to Robert. Robert laughed. Hi, Michael. Michael, this is Mary Ann Singleton of hollandaise sauce fame. Mary Ann, my roommate, Michael.
I mean, I don't feel like I'm like Mary Ann. She showed up a lot more naive than I did. I mean, I was pretty aware of what was going on. But it's still the idea, I mean, you come into the city and you're a straight woman, it's different, you know? I mean, you're coming here for a different experience. And in fact, when I first came out here, I lived with 5 other people, and one of them was a gay man who I became good buddies with. And I didn't know any gay men before that. I didn't think about it. But he didn't tell me until he said, let's go to San Francisco. And he says, let's go to Castro. And then he told me he was gay. So it's like, well, okay, you know, I got used to it. But it's like you expect anything like that here. In a way, you come here knowing you're going to get the unusual, so it sort of makes you more accepting already, you know.
There was a lot of Michael and you, right? I mean, wasn't Armistead borrowing heavily from?
Well, we'd sit around and talk about things, but you never knew when the camera was on or what he was taking in there. And like I said, next thing you know, it'd be in the paper a week later.
Right.
And
something you said innocently a week before.
You had to be very kind of careful almost.
Thanks a lot, Todd.
Armistead likes to push the edges in the kind of storyline that he came up with, but no matter how much hyperbole I thought was involved, he always managed to bring this wonderful human element to it, this really deep human element to it, that made you sort of feel at home, and you thought, if you enjoy reading this, if you were talking, it's like liking the strip Doonesbury, that sort of thing, you know. If you're both really sort of into the strip, that kind of presupposes a certain understanding and a certain appreciation.
Armistead in his books talks about an extended family. Do you think that in any way resembles your friendships with each other?
Mm.
Oh, most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I think so. But it's not something that was on purpose. We just sort of all noticed it one day. You know, looked around and went, God, it's just like in the books.
Family. I mean, it is like family. I mean, I think we spend more time with each other than any of our own families.
Our real family show.
Yeah.
Armistead, he was very clever in that he included people who were active in the city and places that people in the city knew, sometimes using the real names and sometimes fictional. And people like that. They like that a lot. They like to see who was in the columns. They like to see if some of the things that he was alluding to might be some things that we didn't know about before that we might find out by reading those columns. And at the same time, he was, in a way, publicizing the things that make this city different and unique.
Beecham decided to drink his lunch at Wilkes Bashford. There, amongst the wicker and lucite and cool plaster walls, he downed 3 Negronis while he tried on a pair of $225 Walter Neuberger boots. He was fitted by Walter Neuberger himself. "How does it feel?" asked the designer. "Heaven," said Beecham. "Exactly the right amount of Campari."
Most of my friends, and a lot of the people that I would meet at cocktail parties, for instance, would actually audition for Tales of the City. They would come up to me and say, "You won't believe what happened to me last week. Maybe you can use it." And a lot of the plot turns in Tales of the City hinged on information given to me by readers.
Let us pray now the family prayer, which reminds us that we all have the same Father.
Swinging sharply, so sharply in fact that his crucifix grazed Prue's chest, Father Paddy Starr turned to face his public, flashing the fluorescent grin that had endeared him to thousands of local late-night television viewers. "Prue, darling!" He pecked her once on each cheek, then held her at arm's length as if to check the merchandise for damage. "What on earth are you doing in this He-Man roughneck place?" "I'm looking for a safari jacket. What about you, Father? They don't make cassocks in khaki, do they?" Father Paddy shrieked, then sighed dramatically. "And more's the pity, my child, more's the pity. Wouldn't that be divine, this tired old basic black, year in, year out? It's truly loathsome. I long for a new dress." Prue tittered appreciatively. She loved the cute way Father Paddy joked about his dress and used the word divine in the civilian sense. It made him seem accessible somehow, not like a priest at all, more like a spiritual decorator.
The peace that we are starved for in our world, our little global village, our homes, our hearts. Peace. Peace is my gift. And if you can't laugh at your faith and yourself, you're in big trouble. Of course it's a bit naughty, but it's the only way it works. That's the magic. That's the power. I mean, the Thornbirds only works if it's a Catholic priest. It doesn't work if it's a Lutheran. This thing doesn't work if it's all fictional, if it's all make-believe and pretend. It works because there's just enough, as we say theologically, fundamentum in re. There's a little bit of foundation in fact, and just enough to be funny. So you take the most visible priest in the area, Father Miles, who is the sacrificial lamb on television every week, and poke fun at him. And he can either take it or he can't. But if you're going to be on TV or radio, at that time I had 2 weekly radio shows, a daily radio show at the #1 AM radio station in Northern California. If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. And so if folks are going to be offended, I think in the main, Armistead picked big targets who could handle the wickedness of the little Barb, the burr under the saddle, the little, he was lashing us with wet noodles. It didn't hurt that much.
The landlady scrawled 5 words at the bottom of her daughter's list. A man and a girl. Mona blinked at it in disbelief. This is it? Mrs. Madrigal nodded. God, it's so sexist. I beg your pardon, young lady. Girl, gasped Mona, you're a woman. Mrs. Madrigal shook her head. You're a woman, dear. I'm a girl. And proud of it. Mona smiled. My own goddamn father, a sexist. My darling daughter, said Mrs. Madrigal, transsexuals can never be sexist.
I think that one of the things that Armistead's book did for me was gave me just a different way of looking at things. Armistead's book was a road sign. And it said, you know, there are many ways of relating to people, and there's many different ways of family. I guess I, as a transsexual, sort of felt alone. You know, the American Indians used to call transsexuals he who walks alone, and in a sense it's true, you don't have a whole lot of peers. So yeah, I was seeking, you know, family, and it wasn't working because I was seeking family in very traditional ways. And I went to this very deep depression, and I stayed in bed for about a week and got up one day because I needed groceries and went out and came across Armistead's Tales in a used, you know, bookstore for like $3 or something. And David had talked about it for so long and I'd never read it. So I picked it up and it really changed things for me. Again, you know, it broadened my aspect of family and made me understand a little better the value of humor. And keeping your humor as life unfolds.
Michael's parents had rented a Dodge Aspen upon their arrival in the city, so it was easy enough to fill up their time with Muir Woods and Sausalito, the crooked street and Fisherman's Wharf. But now it was Sunday. If he was careful, very careful, he could ease them through it, protect their fragile Reader's Digest sensibilities from the horror of the love that dare not speak its name. In this town, he thought, the love that dare not speak its name almost never shuts up.
I love homosexuals, if you can believe that. I love them enough to tell them the truth, because I know that there is hope for the homosexuals, that if they're willing to turn from sin the same as any individual, that they can be ex-homosexuals the same as there can be an ex-murderer, an ex-thief, or ex-anybody.
Anita Bryant is an ex-beauty queen, a runner-up as Miss America. She instigated the anti-homosexual campaign, which she called Save Our Children.
Well, the great part about the column was that I wrote it on a day-to-day basis, so I was able to incorporate daily events as they occurred, sometimes right on top of the event. When Anita Bryant announced her anti-homosexual crusade in Florida, I was able to jump on it a day after it happened and reflect it in a fictional way. Even that was a fight. The editor of the Chronicle said, why should this be of any interest to anyone in San Francisco, something that happens in Florida?
It all started when the Dade County Commission passed a law in favor of homosexuals. It said you can't refuse to employ homosexuals or rent to them. And Anita Bryant spoke out against this, being a Christian mother of 4 and Miss America runner-up and all the normal, God-fearing people in Miami backed her 100%. We didn't think too much about it, of course, because we don't have near as many homosexuals up here as they do in Miami. Papa says they like the ocean. Anyway, pretty soon this organized group of homosexuals tried to force the Citrus Commission to take Anita Bryant's commercials off TV. Can you imagine? Anita said go right ahead, if that's what she had to do to make it safe for her children to walk the streets of Miami. God bless her.
Maupin had always addressed the political side of being gay. These issues became more pressing as the years went by. The anti-homosexual campaign, such as that led by Anita Bryant, was one thing, but in the early 80s, everything was to change with the advent of AIDS. He would confront the epidemic in his last 3 novels, but years before then, he had depicted the double life of his friend Rock Hudson, without mentioning his name, as a means of demonstrating the hypocrisy that still exists in Hollywood about gay actors.
The trophy room was almost too much for Michael to absorb. A whole row of plaques from Photoplay magazine, mostly from the 50s, keys to a dozen cities, telegrams from Hitchcock, Billy Wilder, DeMille, silver-framed photos of blank blank with JFK, blank blank with Marilyn Monroe, blank blank with Ronald Reagan, a needlepoint pillow from Mary Tyler Moore. After Guido had left, Michael just stood there shaking his head. Is this his room? Across the hall said Ned, want to see it? Should we? Ned smiled sleepily. It used to be my room too, remember? They passed through double doors, massive and oaken, into a space that looked like a set for a movie star's bedroom. The window opened onto the pool and the world. The bed was enormous, exactly the sort of bed Michael expected blank blank to sleep in.
Everyone in Hollywood knew that Rock Hudson was gay. It was common knowledge among the press. It was common knowledge among his friends. People didn't mind. People loved him. It was not an issue. The only issue was that an enormous deceit had been put across on the American public. And the press didn't know how to acknowledge this fact when Rock himself and the people around him weren't making specific references to his sexuality. It was perfectly obvious to me as soon as he announced his diagnosis that he would soon be at the mercy of the tabloids. If someone didn't step forward in a respectable way and say to the mainstream press, yes, he's gay, yes, I'm gay, we've known this, everyone's known this, he's a good man, give him a break, which is what I did. I think he had very foolish advisors around him. I think if they had acted earlier and in a more honest way, that Rock would have emerged as an even greater hero than he did.
When Rock Hudson died from AIDS in 1985, it was Maupin's involvement in the press handling of this diagnosis that established him as an outspoken representative for gay politics. He was often called upon for his views on controversial issues such as outing, that is, revealing a person's homosexuality against their will.
The real issue is hypocrisy. If hypocrisy is being engaged in, then I think people should be entitled to shoot that hypocrisy down. Most of the so-called figures who are being outed are people who lead complete lives with their partners. They're not creeping off secretly for 10 minutes of a sexual escapade and then are heterosexual the rest of the time. They have complete lives, and I think we have to start seeing these complete lives. And those of us who are honest about that are getting more and more impatient with the people who say, I can't talk about that because that might hurt my career. Well, we have to start questioning a society that says it's okay for that to hurt that person's career. We have to say, what's wrong with society in the first place? Why do they have this attitude, and how are we going to change it? And we're not going to change it until gay people become more visible. It's that simple. It's our invisibility that's killing us right now. It's our invisibility that made millions of Americans, millions of people around the world think that the 100,000 people who have died of AIDS so far were not human beings. Those 100,000 people did not matter. A lot of people found it hard to handle the response to the recent revelation by Magic Johnson that he has AIDS, because so many people, so many reporters, people who should know better, seem to be acting as if AIDS had just been discovered, as if this were the first time it had ever happened. And what they were saying, the subtext of that, of course, was, well, finally a real person has gotten it, finally a real human being, not a homosexual, not a drug abuser, but a real human being. Finally, it matters. Well, it's very hard not to be bitter about that attitude. It's very hard to sit and listen to them saying AIDS has a hero at last when we've seen many, many heroes made over the past decade. We've seen the most heroic behavior imaginable.
People talked of nothing else. Who has it, who thinks he has it, who's positive, who couldn't possibly be negative, who will never take the test, who's almost ready to take the test. To get away from the tragedy and the talk, some of his friends had moved to places like Phoenix and Charlottesville, but Michael couldn't see the point of it. The worst of times in San Francisco was still better than the best of times anywhere else. There was beauty here and conspicuous bravery, and civilized straight people who were doing their best to help. It was also his home when all was said and done. He loved this place with a deep and unreasoning passion. The choice was no longer his.
Tales was the first fiction about AIDS to be published anywhere. When it appeared in the Chronicle in 1983. I struggled with the decision to do it because I felt that in some ways I might be draining all the humor out of what was essentially a comedy. But I realized I couldn't accurately write about life in the city without somehow or other explaining this new terror that had come into our midst. So I had a sort of off-camera death. John Fielding, who was a beloved character in the earlier books, is shown to be dead when Baby Cakes begins. And the response was enormous. There were people who were so angry with me that they wrote really pointed letters to the Chronicle telling me that this was the wrong decision, that I was allowing my own political agenda to get in the way of what was essentially their light morning entertainment. I didn't listen to them because I realized that I had to keep being true to my own instincts. I had to keep explaining life as I saw it. And the next 3 books dealt with AIDS, I think in the way that we deal with it here in San Francisco as a part of life. It has to be a part of life. It can't be the whole thing.
Armistead Maupin not only writes about AIDS in his novels, but has also been touched by the epidemic in his daily life. His lover, Terry Anderson, is HIV positive.
It's been about 5 years now that I've tested, and almost 5 years. And the progression has been interesting. You know, when I first tested, it was panic. Oh my God, I'm going to die. I'll be dead in a year. Oh my God, you know, what am I doing? I didn't die. I kept on living. And then I started taking AZT a year later. I thought, this is the end. It didn't happen. So after a while, I mean, I just kind of keep going on, and I keep being healthy, and I think that helps me get through it better than anything else, you know. I told Armistead before we went on the book tour, I said, you know, it may come up, let's talk about my being antibody positive. And he talked about it, and people were shocked. I mean, people just were shocked. I think the annoying thing about Magic Johnson's announcement was the way the media reacted to it, that it was the first time that anyone had ever had AIDS. It was as if they just discovered it. I think the plus is that there may be sort of a magic watch, you know, let's save magic, which is great, because if they save magic, they'll save me. I'm negative. I've been negative for 6 years, ever since I've known Terry. And I get really sad letters sometimes from people who say, well, I feel kind of bad about myself because I want to go out there and meet somebody special, but every time I hear that somebody is HIV positive, I just don't want to sleep with them because I'm worried about myself. Well, that needn't be a worry. If this is someone you love, if this is someone really important to you, don't let it get in the way. You've got the consideration, of course, that you know that you've got a journey to make with that person, but you know the one that I've made with Terry has been the happiest 6 years of my life. And so it's in some ways the experience with this, I think, has heightened ours. I can say that anyway. Yeah, certainly. Absolutely.
I know what you're thinking now. You're asking yourself, what did we do wrong? How did we let this happen? Which one of us made him that way? I can't answer that, Mama. In the long run, I guess I really don't care. All I know is this. If you and Papa are responsible for the way I am, then I thank you with all my heart, for it's the light and the joy of my life. There's not much else I can say except I'm the same Michael you've always known. You just know me better now. I have never consciously done anything to hurt you. I never will. Please don't feel you have to answer this right away. It's enough for me to know that I no longer have to lie to the people who taught me to value the truth. Mary Ann sends her love. Everything is fine at 28 Barbary Lane. Your loving son, Michael.